fell, there were billions of dollars in military equipment that needed to go somewhere. Bill Clinton in his presidency decided that they were going to give a couple $1 billion worth of this equipment to to police forces within the United States. So then in the early 90s, what you see is in places like LA and New York and Chicago, you see up-armored vehicles, you see police who are starting to look much more like the military instead of Barney Fife. You know, the guy with the 6-shooter, the handcuffs and the billy club, those days are over.
Yeah.
Now you look at a police officer and you compare him to what a cop looked like in the 1950s or 60s, you're talking about full body armor, you're talking about a shotgun in the car, you're talking about a pistol with you, mace with you, a taser with you, a collapsible baton, 2 sets of handcuffs, flexi cuffs. Then you're going to have maybe a couple of smoke grenades or something crazy like this, and you're going to have an assault rifle in the backseat of the car. I mean, that's your average police officer. That's in a town like Chesterton, Indiana, where my parents live now. My brother, actually, who's a police officer in that town, that's what he carries. I mean, in a town of Chesterton, Indiana, 11,000 people, he needs an assault rifle, a shotgun, full body armor, and a Glock to patrol the streets of Chesterton, Indiana. So that'll give you, I think, some kind of an anecdotal idea of just how militarized things have become with the police. There's a great new movie that just came out, Gasland 2, talking about the fracking situation. In that movie, there's a portion where some journalists and activists snuck in to what was the biggest conference of fracking CEOs and industry titans. What they found at that conference and what they recorded was all of the titans and all of the CEOs and the advisors for these companies advising people in the companies who are facing protests at home to read the counterinsurgency manual that David Petraeus wrote in 2007, because how they view anti-fracking protesters is insurgents, and the way you deal with an insurgency is through counterinsurgency efforts. And this is the way they're going to be viewing protesters in the future. I mean, I think it's nothing new. I mean, if you read, we both know, if you read labor history, you read the history of social movements and revolutions have been extremely violent. But for these tactics and strategies to come home in a very real way, I think that's serious. I don't think that should be pushed aside as some kind of conspiracy theory nonsense.
Right.
And drones. I mean, well, look, we should mention as well. Now you have police forces from Houston to Miami to San Diego and LA who are using drones at home.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's just the first sort of tip of the iceberg type of thing.
I was unnerved at Pierogi Fest this year when a private citizen up on one of the rooftops on 119th Street was flying post-traumatic stress disorder somewhat when you return, and you sought help for that. Do you feel that there's a good safety net for returning veterans today, and is the VA living up to its job? Are they equipped to handle things like this today?
You have a lot of good people who work within the VA system. You have people in Congress, I think, who genuinely do care about the issue. They want to help with veterans benefits. We have members in the organization, like the gentleman who's standing just to the right of me that you can't see in the camera view right now, who works with veterans getting disability benefits, medical benefits, educational benefits. So there's a lot of good people who are working in the system. I think the system itself is very dysfunctional. I think people have a hard time trying to navigate that system. People who are trying to find help, a lot of people who live in rural areas who don't have access to medical institutions, VA institutions. For female veterans, it's extremely difficult. You're dealing with a male-dominated military and a male-dominated situation where we have, 1/3 to 1/4 of women who are coming home from serving in the armed forces experiencing military sexual trauma. I mean, those numbers are catastrophically high. I mean, there's a great documentary, again, that deals with this called The Invisible War. So yes, in a lot of ways it's been disastrous for veterans coming home. The unemployment rate is twice that of the national average. That number doubles for African American, Latin American veterans. Same with homeless veterans. African American, Latin American veterans only make up 26% of the armed forces, but they make up 56% of the homeless population amongst the armed forces. So all of the same disproportionate numbers you see in society on a whole, you see that within the veterans community, but magnified and compounded. Now, all of that being said, I think there's been big shifts and changes also that have been being made in the VA system. So you have people who have been fighting within the system, you have people who have been pressuring from outside the VA system, and I think a combination of both of those things has seen definitely, I would assume most veterans would agree, an increase in services in the VA, better help, They're trying to cut down the number of days and the number of weeks and months it takes to get back your disability ratings, and it's already astronomically high, way too high. It's unacceptable. But there is, I think, movement being made. I would be disingenuous if I just sat here and said, oh, the whole thing is crap and this or that. No, there are movements being made. I think it's too little. I think a lot of it is too late. In other words, I think a lot of the things they're doing now, they should have done before they sent 1.7 million people to the Middle East to fight and die in these occupations. It's one of the only entities that has to go to Congress every year and ask for a budget every year. The VA medical system is not digitalized, if you could believe that. I mean, they're still dealing with hard copies of everything. So folders and stacks of medical files being shipped all over the country. People's papers getting lost, people's medical reports getting lost. I mean, really a very disorganized, backward system compared to where we should be in 2013. Yes, I think there's probably more the Obama administration could be doing, although it should be noted that they have made some decent steps. There's been different programs that have been in place. So yeah, I mean, it's very difficult talking about the VA because it's one of those systems where it should be ours as veterans. You know, it's one of those things where you would like to assume that what we want we're going to be able to see, but it's also one of those entities that we're spending a lot of time fighting and also trying to work with. But the bonds that we've built primarily have been with the National Nurses Union. So as opposed to going through the VA system, we've built bonds with the National Nurses Union, who's, you know, as you know, probably one of the most progressive unions around, more than willing to take an anti-war stance. Largely African American members at the Jesse Brown VA of the union, largely women, and they've been tough as nails, and they've been willing to work with us. And all we initially asked the VA at Jesse Brown, we wanted 30 new nurses hired, and we wanted a women's clinic separate from the male clinics, so the female veterans felt safe going in there talking about their private issues and so forth. And all we had to do was threaten the VA, Jesse Brown VA, with an informational picket, and they folded and within 2 weeks hired the nurses and opened the clinic separate from the rest of the hospital. So what that showed us, and why we've been playing our hands lightly since then, has been that, one, we can make movement, you know, when you organize with people. Number two, it only took a little bit. In other words, we only had 6-7 veterans working on that initiative at the time. Now, if we threaten and get 200-300 veterans standing outside the Jesse Brown Clinic, which is the kind of power we're hoping to foment and create, then I think a year or 2 years from now, you can ask the Jesse Brown or demand that the Jesse Brown implement X, Y, and Z, and I think they're going to have to do it. And I think that people forget just how much power they have. You know, so to kind of end on a positive note, I think it's really important that people recognize when you start shaking those branches, the people who are in power, they notice. I mean, there was a reason why they cracked down on the Occupy movement the way they cracked down on it. There's a reason why the VA clinic freaked out when a bunch of veterans connected with the nurses and said, hey, we're going to bypass you and we're going to organize from the grassroots level and demand this, not so it looks like the nurses are being selfish and demanding more and more for their union members, which is crap anyway, because they're some of the most hardest worked, underpaid people I've ever seen at that Jesse Brown VA clinic. And then it can't just be the veterans, complaining that the VA is never good enough. No, now you've got the veterans working together with the nurses, both saying that, hey, the veterans are getting poor service because the nurses are understaffed and underfunded, and the veterans saying we want better service with better staffed and better funded nurses. And it works, you know, for both parties. And not only that, but, you know, you're making all of these connections, getting people to realize how there's a connection to economic austerity at home and military empire spending abroad, getting people to recognize the connections. Why is it that black veterans are facing something much different than white veterans when they're coming home? All of those things are worked out and talked about when you're doing those kind of campaigns, and it's, you know, extremely positive work.
Yeah. So did you go to Washington High School or St. Francis de Sales?
No, I moved before I went to high school.
Did you?
We moved when I was in middle school to Chesterton.
Oh,
so I ended up graduating from Chesterton. My dad graduated from Washington. My mom graduated from St. Francis.
Okay. All right. Well, good. I'm kind of moved to say thank you for your service, but instead I think what I'd like to say is thank you for what you're doing today and all the work that you're doing. I'm glad that you found some support here tonight, and I hope you're successful at what you're trying to achieve today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Okay.
How was it?